And good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us on this beautiful Wednesday morning. We do realize it's a little bit early. Typically, we like to do our Facebook Live events towards the afternoon, but we wanted to give doing one in the morning for all of you out there on your commute to work, an opportunity to listen to world-renowned Dr. Bill Anton and founder of CEO Effectiveness. And today we're going to dive into a topic that's near and dear to, I think, folks across the spectrum, right, across the board. This thing called leadership, right? What leadership is, and what are the top 3 things that you need to know to be an effective leader. So Dr. Bill Anton, good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Yeah, good morning. Dr. Anton, I think a good place for us to start is kind of understanding, what do we mean by leadership? What does leadership mean? How is it defined?
Well, I think fundamentally the leadership is the ability to achieve results through others. In order to do that, I would say the number one practical skill for effective leadership is empathy.
Empathy.
And there's a zero correlation between intelligence and empathy. Yeah.
That's good to know. That's very good to know.
Yeah.
Very good. So being empathetic, right? Can you kind of walk me through an example, right, of what it would mean to be empathetic in a situation where I'm a leader?
Yeah. I think being empathetic or empathic is the ability for you to put yourself in someone else's shoes. Now, the less you're aware of yourself, and the more there are unknowns about your relationship with yourself, the less effective and the less accurate and objective your capacity for empathy is going to be. So if you objectify the other person, if you don't understand that they have an internal experience that's going to contribute to their performance, and that how you relate to them is going to have an effect on that outcome, then you're leaving a lot of money on the table.
Very interesting. So our ability to relate to others, right, and being very sound in the understanding of where they're coming from, why they're doing what they're doing,
right,
and ultimately what is influencing them at the same time.
Correct.
Okay, very good. So being empathetic. Okay, so now as a leader, so whether it's folks hold managerial positions or it's within a household with family matters, or in the business world, what is one thing that folks can start doing outside of empathy? What is one thing to be an effective leader that they can start doing right now?
Well, I would say the first thing they could do immediately is to sort of take a part of their brain and dedicate it to being a bystander or observer of their own behavior. That's not easy to do because our brain really tries to keep us on track. And on track means on a pathway that we're familiar with. The problem is that we tend to contribute to what we see. And then we use what we observe, that is the consequences of our behavior, to validate what we already believe. And pulling oneself out of that cycle is the threshold for starting to become a dynamic leader.
Very interesting. Very good. Now, I've heard you mention this before, from a time management perspective, as well as folks that you rely on that are within your team that you do have an influence over, or you do want to make a change in their lives, right? So that the idea of only doing what no one else can do, right, as a leader, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
What can you break that down a little bit more for us?
Yeah, I think that a CEO of an organization should only engage in those tasks that no one else in the organization can do effectively. And what that does is that limits their role where they're not duplicating. And it also forces them to develop the people that are reporting to them in the organization. Because when you delegate, sometimes things are not going to be accomplished to your standards. And we often interpret that as a bad thing, but more frequently it's a good thing. Even if mistakes are made, it gives you an opportunity to develop the other person. And as many people who have been to some of my presentations have heard me say, commitment to a relationship, an organization, or anything is a function of the possibility of growth. Where there's no potential for growth, where you're never being stretched, your commitment's going to wane. And when commitment to an organization wanes, you know what happens to the organization.
Absolutely. So mistakes can be also viewed as opportunities.
Mistakes are opportunities. In fact, if you think about it, we learn much more from our failures than from our successes. Our successes really only teach us that what we did worked and we're happy with the outcome. What it doesn't tell us is, was that the best possible outcome? And how do we improve our processes, our engagement levels to achieve better outcomes? Failure is a better teacher in that sense, because when you fail, you now know one thing that didn't work or didn't work as effectively as you wanted it to. And you're now stimulated to become curious, to become engaged. And that level of engagement and curiosity is also correlated with commitment. And your commitment as a leader turns on your direct reports. They see your enthusiasm, they see you're stretching yourself, and modeling is a very powerful influence. And they begin to model and to emulate your behavior, which in total is great for your company.
Wow, that's profound. So, and I heard you say this before, and I kind of want to go back to it. So we contribute to what we see, right?
Right.
So within an organization, kind of elaborate on that, if you wouldn't mind.
Well, let's take a simple example that almost everyone can relate to. Let's say we know a person with a chip on their shoulder.
Sure.
They're kind of an angry person. They, as a result of early trauma, early history, developmental history, they're kind of angry, and they view sort of like it's me or them. And so in every situation, out of all of the stimulation that the situation offers, which we all do, but they extract those points that validate their belief that their anger is justified. So a person with a chip on their shoulder walks into a situation, and it doesn't take long for them to engage in some altercation or to be angry with someone or to feel their blood boiling, where a person with a different history would have a totally different experience. They might experience the same people in the same way. But what happens is, what our history creates a template that you could sort of think of as lenses that you put over your eyes. And those lenses are not clear glass. They're warped by our early experiences and our brain circuitry. So when we're looking through those lenses, we're getting consistent feedback from the outside world, but the feedback is not necessarily objective. In fact, it usually isn't. And it's not really helpful, because all we're doing is convincing ourselves that we're right, just as the person with a chip on their shoulder always finds validation that they're right in being angry, that other people are just waiting to take advantage of them. So in that sense, we contribute to what we see.
Wow, that makes a lot of sense. And so here's something that I know even myself and other folks from the entrepreneur world, this is something from a management perspective and a leadership perspective that can be a bit of a challenge. How do you know if you are truly being objective?
Well, you know, it's interesting. I smile because I'm thinking of a section in my first book, Business Success Through Self-Knowledge, where I talk about how do you know if your mental models are disproportionately influencing your interactions with others. Well, if all people relate to you in a consistent way, if everyone is submissive, or everyone that you interact with is argumentative. So when you get a reduction in the variability of the richness of the world in responding to you, then you begin to know that you're contributing too much to what you see. The healthy person lives in a highly differentiated world that people respond, because everyone is allowed to be who they truly are, because you're allowing yourself to be who you truly are. So you get this wide range of behaviors from all kinds of people, but the common denominator is how free another person is to be their true self in your presence. And the more you're able to free up others to be creative, to be engaged, to be who they truly are, to express what they truly feel at the moment, is a measure of it's a measure of your self-awareness, self-knowledge, and really to a large extent your mental health, which I would define as the revision of the early circuitry in your life.
Wow. So there's definitely a correlation between being a leader and a liberator.
Absolutely. They're the same thing.
Wow.
I mean, a great leader is a great liberator and has enormous capacity for empathy. And that is why they're so effective in achieving results through others.
I love that. Leader to liberator. Very good.
Yeah, it's a great concept.
And so another topic that I know we've discussed briefly is the idea of we influence the results used to measure our effectiveness, right? And so when measuring our effectiveness as a leader, right, and kind of looking at what are the results we're choosing to look at to see if we are being effective, what are some ways we can do that, but being objective, right? Making sure that we are being that liberator, and we're pushing our team to its fullest potential.
Yeah, I think the important thing there is that most people or a lot of businesses tend to describe their vision in terms of what really should be outcome measures. Like, we want to grow at this rate, we want the ROI to be this in 2 years, et cetera. I think all of those indices are very important, but they don't turn people on. They don't enliven people. They don't get people to engage with their heart and soul. So one of the important things that a leader can do is to talk about their own dreams. You know, as Robert Cooper said, dreams that are so big that only your heart can hold. And then let the outcome measures fall where they may. Because if you think about it, if you're working in an organization or for a leader, and you truly believe in the big vision of the organization, what the North Star of the organization, then that's going to energize you. That's going to enhance your performance. That's going to capture your heart and soul much more than to say, what I'm really working for and what I'm giving my life for in this organization is an increase in ROI in the next 4 quarters.
And you know, that's interesting. You've mentioned this before. The idea of why are folks on your team committed in the first place? Because folks can be committed for the wrong reasons.
Well, absolutely. Your level of commitment is directly correlated with your level of self-knowledge.
That's profound.
Yeah.
So to kind of bring it back full circle. So first and foremost, empathy, right? Being empathetic to others that are around you that you want to have influence on, right? Whether that's pushing the mission forward within your organization, whether that's in your personal life, but being empathetic is extremely important when we're talking about leadership.
Absolutely.
Outside of that, some top things to keep in mind, right? So only do what no one else can do. And this really matters when we are talking about time management, right? As well as empowering others to do things that they're good at instead of being that control freak at times, right? Where we want to do everything, which doesn't necessarily mean that we're being effective.
Right. And we fail to develop the most valuable resource around us, which is our team.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Another thing to keep in mind is we contribute to what we see, right? And so the idea there is within our organization, the contributions that are being made, not just by ourselves as a leader, but also the team itself. What's the overall big vision? What's actually playing out and what's being seen? Is that sound?
That's yeah, that is accurate. And I'd like to say one more thing about vision. There's a big difference in a vision where the person at the top creates a vision and hands it down, and a vision that's inductively created by the group. So if you're meeting, if you want people to invest their hearts and souls, they have to be a part of the big audacious goal, and of developing the vision that's really worthy to believe in.
Now, as a leader, if I'm sharing and I'm being vulnerable in a sense, right? The big audacious goal, opening my heart and soul to my team, right? So there's a sense, not just being empathetic to the other, but also being willing to be vulnerable, right? With what my own passions are, what my own visions are.
Absolutely.
So this idea of being the strong, cold-hearted person in the office doesn't necessarily equate to being effective.
Exactly. Okay. In fact, one of my first supervisors or bosses was a person that probably taught me one of the great lessons of leadership. And it was simple. And this was because I was really annoyed with a particular employee. She was much older than me and sort of like had her own ideas, and they weren't organizationally or team focused. And I'd go to talk to my boss about this, and he would respond with this profound statement that the most valuable employees are those that tell you what you don't want to hear. And that was really profound. And from that point onward, I was a little skeptical of people that told me how wonderful I was, and a little more interested in people that were willing to share the ways that they were disappointed in me.
I can certainly relate to that on multiple levels, multiple levels. All right. And the third one, as we're wrapping this up, so we influence the results used to measure our effectiveness, right? And so when we're thinking about the results that we're using to see, if we're being successful or not as a leader, right? We will influence those results.
Yeah. And I think the important point there is, are we consciously influencing the results that we're pursuing based on our vision? Or is what we don't know about ourselves, which generally influences our behavior more than what we know about ourselves, determining an outcome that may or may not be what we desire on the conscious level?
Outstanding.
So,
Dr. Bill Anton, always a pleasure, sir. Thank you all so much for tuning in this morning. Check us out, www.ceoeffectiveness.com, a list of books that have been published by Dr. Anton and his team. And we look forward to seeing you all next week at the next 15-Minute Mastery.